The rain hammered against the penthouse windows as Margaret Collins stood frozen in the doorway of Christopher Wade's private office, her hands trembling around the silver tray she'd been carrying. For 3 years, she had worked as his housekeeper, moving through the opulent spaces of his Manhattan residence like a ghost, silent, efficient, invisible. But today, invisibility was no longer an option. "Sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm raging outside. "Your mother is alive. I saw her in the asylum." Christopher's pen stopped mid-signature. The silence that followed felt thick enough to drown in. Slowly, deliberately, he set down the Mont Blanc and raised his eyes to meet hers. Those steel-gray eyes that had negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching now held something Margaret had never seen before. Raw, unfiltered shock. "What did you say?" His voice was dangerously quiet. Margaret's throat tightened. She knew what she was risking. The Wade family tragedy was sacred ground, untouchable. Everyone knew the story. Victoria Wade, the beloved philanthropist and socialite, had died in a car accident 15 years ago when Christopher was only 19. Her death had transformed him from a carefree college student into the ruthless businessman he was today. Cold, calculated, emotionally impenetrable. I saw her, Mr. Wade, at Riverbend Psychiatric Hospital. I'm certain it was her." Christopher stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. At 6'2", he towered over Margaret's petite frame. "My mother is buried at Greenwood Cemetery. I visit her grave every month. You're mistaken." "I wish I were, sir." Margaret's voice gained strength, even as her heart raced. "But I volunteer at Riverbend every Thursday. Today, I was delivering books to the long-term care wing, and I saw her in room 237. She looked older, thinner, but it was her. I'd recognize her anywhere. I used to work for your family when I was younger, before the accident." This last revelation made Christopher pause. He studied Margaret with new intensity, as if truly seeing her for the first time. She was in her late 40s, with kind brown eyes and graying hair always pulled back in a simple bun. Unremarkable, trustworthy, but this claim was anything but ordinary. "You worked for my family?" His tone shifted slightly, confusion mixing with the anger. "Only for 6 months, 17 years ago, when your mother needed extra help for a charity gala season. I was much younger then. You were away at Harvard, but Mrs. Wade was kind to me. She always remembered my daughter's birthday, asked about her schooling." Margaret's eyes glistened. "A woman like that? You don't forget." Christopher walked to the window, his reflection ghostly in the rain-streaked glass. Outside, the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks. "My father identified her body. There was a funeral. Hundreds of people attended. I know, sir. I was there in the back. I grieved for her, too." Margaret took a tentative step forward. "But today, when I walked past that room, she looked directly at me, and she said something." Christopher spun around. "She spoke?" She said, "Tell him I never wanted to leave." Then a nurse came and ushered me out, said I'd wandered into the restricted wing by mistake. Margaret's hands were shaking so badly now that the tray rattled. "But, sir, the name on the door wasn't Victoria Wade. It said Virginia Watson, and the date of admission was June 2009, 3 months before your mother's supposed accident." The color drained from Christopher's face. June 2009. He remembered that summer with painful clarity. His mother had seemed distant, distracted. His father, Richard Wade, had been traveling constantly for business. There had been arguments behind closed doors, his mother's tear-stained face at breakfast, his father's cold dismissals. "This is insane," Christopher muttered, but his conviction was wavering. "Why would you tell me this? What do you want?" Margaret looked wounded. "I want nothing, Mr. Wade. I'm telling you because if my daughter were lost somewhere, and someone knew, I'd want them to tell me, whatever happened, whatever the truth is, you deserve to know." Christopher's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. His father had been dead for 2 years, a heart attack in his office, surrounded by legal documents and stock reports. If there had been secrets, they'd died with him. Or had they? Riverbend is a private facility, Christopher said slowly, his analytical mind engaging. Expensive. Someone's been paying for her care all these years. The nurse mentioned something about a trust, Margaret offered quietly. I didn't understand it all, but she said the patient's care was guaranteed through a private fund. Christopher moved to his desk and opened his laptop with sharp, precise movements. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing financial databases that most people didn't know existed. The Wade family fortune was vast and complex. His father had always insisted on maintaining multiple trusts, offshore accounts, Byzantine financial structures that Christopher had never fully investigated. Why would he? He'd inherited everything, or so he thought. There, he breathed, pointing at the screen, though Margaret couldn't see it from where she stood. The Victoria Memorial Trust, established June 15, 2009. I always thought it was a charitable fund in her memory. But look at the disbursements, monthly payments to Riverbend Psychiatric Hospital for the past 15 years. The room seemed to tilt. Everything Christopher had built his life upon, his grief, his drive, his carefully constructed walls, suddenly felt like foundations laid on quicksand. If his mother was alive, then his father had orchestrated an elaborate deception. But why? Sir, Margaret said gently. What will you do? Christopher's jaw clenched. I'm going to Riverbend. Tonight. It's nearly 8 o'clock. Visiting hours are over. I don't care. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair, his movements sharp with barely contained emotion. I own half the hospital board. They'll make an exception. Margaret set down the tray on a side table. Mr. Wade, perhaps you should wait until morning. Go in with a clear head. Maybe bring a lawyer. No. The word was final. If there's even a chance my mother is alive and has been locked away for 15 years while I grieved at an empty grave, I need to know. Now. He was halfway to the door when he paused and turned back. For the first time since she'd known him, Christopher Wade looked vulnerable, almost young. Margaret, why did you really come to work for me? 3 years ago, out of dozens of applicants, you took a position that surely pays less than what someone with your experience could earn elsewhere. Margaret met his gaze steadily. Because your mother once told me that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems to disappear into silence. She helped my daughter get a scholarship when we had nothing. I never got to thank her properly. Maybe this is my chance. Something in Christopher's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Come with me. Sir? You saw her. She might respond to a familiar face. He grabbed his car keys. And frankly, I don't want to do this alone. 20 minutes later, Christopher's black Mercedes cut through the rain-soaked streets of Westchester County, heading north toward Riverbend. Margaret sat in the passenger seat, watching the city give way to suburbs, then to the dark tree lines that bordered the psychiatric facility's extensive grounds. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers and the distant rumble of thunder. Christopher's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. As they pulled through the hospital's iron gates, Margaret noticed Christopher's breathing had become shallow, rapid. This man who commanded boardrooms without breaking a sweat was terrified. The main building loomed ahead, a Victorian-era structure that had been modernized with glass additions and security systems. Lights glowed from scattered windows, creating a patchwork of illumination against the stormy sky. Somewhere in that building, if Margaret was right, was a woman who had been erased from the world. Christopher parked near the entrance and killed the engine. For a long moment, he simply stared at the building. What if she doesn't recognize me? He whispered. What if 15 years in this place has destroyed who she was? Then we help her find her way back, Margaret said firmly. But first we find the truth. They stepped out into the rain, and as they approached the entrance, a security guard emerged from the lobby. Recognition flickered across his face when he saw Christopher. The Wade name carried weight even here. Mr. Wade, we weren't expecting you this evening. I need to see a patient. Room 237, Virginia Watson. The guard's expression shifted from welcoming to guarded. Sir, that's a restricted wing. I'll need to call Dr. Harrison. Then call him. Christopher's voice had regained its commanding edge. Tell him Christopher Wade is here, and he has exactly 5 minutes to meet me at that room before I call every member of your board of directors." As the guard scurried inside, Margaret touched Christopher's arm gently. "Whatever we find in there, you're not alone." Christopher nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the building. Somewhere beyond those walls was a woman who was either his mother returned from the dead or a stranger who happened to resemble her. Either way, his life was about to change forever. The guard returned with a tall, silver-haired man in a white coat. "Mr. Wade, I'm Dr. Harrison, director of Riverbend. I understand you want to see one of our patients?" "Virginia Watson, room 237. Now." Dr. Harrison's face remained carefully neutral. "Mr. Wade, patient confidentiality is paid for by the Victoria Memorial Trust, which I now control." Christopher stepped closer. "Either you take me to that room, or I'll have my lawyers shut down every account associated with this facility by morning. Your choice." The doctor's professionalism cracked slightly. "This is highly irregular. So is keeping someone locked away under a false name for 15 years. Dr. Harrison's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a tell that confirmed everything. He knew. They all knew. "Follow me," he said quietly. As they walked through the sterile corridors, past rooms where shadows moved behind frosted glass, Margaret felt her heart hammering. What had she started? What if this destroyed Christopher rather than freed him? They stopped before room 237. Through the small window in the door, Margaret could see a woman sitting in a chair by the window, her silver hair catching the lamplight. She was thin, almost fragile, wearing a simple blue robe, but even from behind, there was something regal about her posture. Dr. Harrison hesitated. "Mr. Wade, before you go in, you should know—" But Christopher had already pushed open the door. The woman turned, and time seemed to stop. Victoria Wade's eyes, those distinctive amber-flecked green eyes that Christopher had inherited, widened in recognition. Her hand flew to her mouth, trembling violently, and a sound escaped her throat that was part gasp, part sob. "Christopher?" Her voice was hoarse, as if rarely used. "My Christopher?" He stood frozen in the doorway, his face drained of all color. Margaret watched as years of grief, anger, and confusion played across his features in rapid succession. The mighty Christopher Wade, who never showed weakness, looked like he might collapse. "Mom?" The word came out broken, childlike. Victoria rose from her chair unsteadily, reaching toward him with shaking hands. "You've grown so tall. You're a man now. I missed everything." The dam broke. Christopher crossed the room in 3 long strides and caught his mother as her legs buckled. They sank to the floor together, Victoria clinging to her son as 15 years of stolen time crashed over them both. Her tears soaked into his expensive suit jacket, while his shoulders shook with silent sobs. Margaret felt her own eyes burning as she witnessed the reunion. Dr. Harrison stood awkwardly in the doorway, his professional composure shattered by the raw emotion filling the small room. "How?" Christopher finally managed, pulling back to look at his mother's face. His hands cupped her cheeks gently, as if afraid she might disappear. "How are you here? We buried you. I spoke at your funeral. I've been visiting your grave for 15 years. Victoria's expression crumbled with guilt and pain. "Your father, Richard, Her breath hitched. "It's complicated, Christopher. So much more complicated than you know." "Then explain it to me." Christopher's voice hardened slightly, the businessman reasserting himself even through the tears. "Explain how my mother has been locked in a psychiatric hospital while I thought she was dead." Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should give you privacy." "No." Christopher didn't take his eyes off Victoria. "You stay. You're going to answer questions too." He helped his mother into her chair and pulled another close, never releasing her hand. Margaret quietly took a seat in the corner, feeling both intrusive and necessary. Victoria's fingers interlaced with Christopher's, gripping them as if he might vanish. "It started in early 2009, she began, her voice gaining strength. "Your father and we'd been having problems for years, the kind you don't see from the outside. He was controlling, obsessive about the family image, about the business. I wanted to do more with the charitable foundation, to have my own voice. He saw it as disobedience. Christopher's jaw clenched. He always was a controlling bastard. But this is beyond. There's more. Victoria's eyes dropped to their joined hands. I discovered something that spring. Your father was involved in financial dealings that were questionable. Not quite illegal, but dancing on the edge. He was using the charitable foundation to launder money, to hide assets from regulators. When I confronted him, when I threatened to go public, he told me I'd destroy everything. Your inheritance, your future, the family name. So he did this instead? Anger flared in Christopher's voice. He faked your death and locked you away. I had a breakdown. Victoria's voice became small, ashamed. The pressure, the threats, the realization that the man I'd loved had become someone I didn't recognize. It broke something in me. I started having panic attacks. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I told my sister Patricia about everything, begged her to help me leave Richard. Margaret saw Christopher stiffen at the mention of his aunt. Aunt Patricia died 5 years ago. Cancer. I know, they told me. Fresh tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. She was my only connection to the outside world, the only person who knew the truth. After she passed, I had no one. Dr. Harrison interjected quietly. Mrs. Wade was admitted voluntarily in June 2009, suffering from severe depression and anxiety. Her husband, your father, insisted on complete privacy for the family's sake. The arrangement was that she would receive treatment and be released when stable. But that never happened, Christopher said flatly. The doctor shifted uncomfortably. Your father was very persuasive. He convinced our staff that Mrs. Wade was delusional, that she might harm herself or others if released. He painted himself as a devoted husband, protecting his troubled wife. The trust he established ensured she received excellent care, and he visited regularly in the early years. He visited? Christopher's voice was sharp with betrayal. He came here, saw her locked away, and then went to her funeral? He gave a eulogy. He cried. I comforted him. Victoria squeezed his hand. The funeral was his masterstroke. 3 months after I was admitted, he told me there'd been a terrible accident, that a woman driving my car had crashed and burned beyond recognition. He said he'd used the opportunity to give me a permanent escape from the pressures that had broken me. He said we could both start fresh. That's insane, Christopher breathed. I thought so too. I screamed, fought, demanded to leave. But legally, I'd admitted myself. And Richard had convinced Dr. Morrison, Harrison's predecessor, that I was having a psychotic break. Victoria's voice turned bitter. Every time I insisted I was being held against my will, it was documented as proof of my delusions. Every time I begged to see you, Richard told me it would traumatize you, that you were better off thinking I was dead than knowing your mother was mentally ill. Margaret watched Christopher's face cycle through emotions, grief, rage, disbelief. But you could have escaped, called someone, sent a letter. I tried. Victoria's voice broke. God, Christopher, I tried everything. But this is a private facility with loyal staff. My outgoing mail was monitored. My phone privileges were restricted. The few times I managed to get messages out, Richard intercepted them. He was always 3 steps ahead. Dr. Harrison added quietly, Your father was on our board of directors. He had significant influence over Mrs. Wade's treatment plan. Christopher stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged animal. This is kidnapping, false imprisonment, medical fraud. My father was a criminal. He was also very careful, Dr. Harrison said. All the paperwork is technically legal. Mrs. Wade did admit herself voluntarily. The trust was established with her listed as the beneficiary, ensuring her care. There are doctor's notes documenting her condition, her treatment, her progress, or lack thereof. Notes he paid you to write, Christopher spat. Not me. Dr. Morrison handled her case until his retirement last year. When I took over, I reviewed her file and found inconsistencies. But by then your father had passed away, and I wasn't sure what to do. Mrs. Wade's condition had actually improved significantly, but legally, she's still a voluntary patient. She could leave anytime she wants. All eyes turned to Victoria. Christopher knelt before her again. "Then why are you still here, Mom? Why didn't you leave when Dad died?" Victoria's face crumpled with a pain that went beyond the physical. "Because he destroyed me, Christopher. Not just my freedom, but my sense of self. 15 years in this place, being told you're crazy, that your memories are false, that your family is better off without you. It breaks something fundamental. And your father's last visit, right before his heart attack, he told me something that kept me paralyzed with fear." "What did he say?" "He said that if I ever tried to come back, if I ever tried to reclaim my life, he'd left evidence that would implicate me in financial crimes, that I'd go to prison, that you'd lose everything and hate me for destroying the Wade legacy." She gripped Christopher's hands desperately. "I couldn't bear the thought of you knowing what a coward I'd become. Better you remember me as I was than see what I'd turned into." Christopher pulled his mother into his arms again. "You're not a coward. You're a survivor. And whatever Dad did, whatever lies he told, we'll fix it. I'll fix it." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. This was so much worse than she'd imagined. Not just a tragic imprisonment, but a psychological torture that had lasted 15 years. "There's something else you should know," Victoria whispered against Christopher's shoulder. "About why I finally decided I wanted to leave. Why I spoke to Margaret today when I've stayed silent for so long." Christopher pulled back to look at her. "What changed?" "Last month, I had a new therapist assigned. Dr. Jennifer Cole. She's young, idealistic, actually listens. When she reviewed my case with fresh eyes, she told me something that gave me hope for the first time in years." Victoria's voice strengthened slightly. "She said that trauma doesn't define us, that it's never too late to reclaim our lives, that my son, you, deserved to know his mother was alive, even if I wasn't the same woman who disappeared." "You're exactly who you need to be," Christopher said fiercely, "and you're leaving here tonight, right now." Dr. Harrison stepped forward. "Mr. Wade, I understand your anger, but we should follow proper procedures." "The proper procedure," Christopher interrupted, his voice cold and commanding, "is for you to process my mother's voluntary discharge immediately. Unless you'd like me to call the police and report a 15-year kidnapping conspiracy that your facility participated in." The doctor paled. "That won't be necessary. I can have the paperwork ready within the hour." "You have 20 minutes. As Dr. Harrison hurried from the room, Christopher turned back to his mother. "We'll go to the penthouse. You'll stay with me until we figure out what comes next. And Mom, whatever evidence Dad claimed to have, whatever threats he made, I have resources he never did. I'll protect you." Victoria touched her son's face wonderingly. "You've become so strong, so sure of yourself. I had to be. I thought I'd lost you." Christopher's voice cracked slightly. "I built an empire on grief and anger. I don't know who I'll be now that you're back." "You'll be my son," Victoria said simply. "That's enough." Margaret stood quietly, preparing to give them privacy, but Victoria noticed. "Wait. You're the woman who saw me, who told Christopher." "Yes, ma'am. I'm Margaret Collins. I work for your son." Victoria rose shakily and crossed to Margaret, taking her hands. "You gave me back my life, my son. How can I ever thank you? You already did, years ago. You helped my daughter when we had nothing. I'm just returning the favor." Understanding dawned in Victoria's eyes. "Little Amy? The scholarship? She's graduating from medical school this spring. Because of your kindness." The two women embraced, united by an invisible thread of compassion that had stretched across years and circumstances. Christopher watched them, something shifting in his expression. A recognition that kindness could echo through time, creating ripples that eventually returned to shore. Dr. Harrison returned with a clipboard of forms. "Mrs. Wade, if you'll sign here, here, and here, you'll be officially discharged into your son's care." Victoria's hand trembled as she signed her real name for the first time in 15 years. With each signature, Margaret could see her straightening, reclaiming pieces of herself that had been locked away with her freedom. "There's one more thing," Christopher said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "I want copies of every document related to my mother's case. Every doctor's note, every visitor log, every financial transaction, everything. Dr. Harrison nodded nervously. Of course. I'll have them sent to your office. Tonight, Christopher clarified. And doctor? If I find out anyone on your staff knew the full truth and said nothing, Riverbend will face lawsuits that'll make your malpractice insurance weep. As they prepared to leave, Victoria paused at the doorway, looking back at the room that had been her prison. I thought I'd feel relief, she said quietly. But all I feel is rage. 15 years, Christopher. He stole 15 years from both of us. Christopher wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Then we'll make sure the next 15 count double. They walked through the corridors together. Christopher, Victoria, and Margaret, an unlikely trio bound by truth and resurrection. Other patients peered through windows. Staff members whispered, but none of it mattered. Victoria Wade was going home. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the rain had stopped. Stars were breaking through the clouds, and Victoria tilted her face toward the sky with an expression of pure wonder. I'd forgotten how beautiful freedom smells, she whispered. Christopher helped his mother into the Mercedes, treating her with the careful reverence usually reserved for priceless artifacts. Margaret climbed into the back seat, giving them space. As they drove through the gates of Riverbend, leaving the facility's lights behind, none of them noticed the figure watching from a third-floor window. Dr. Harrison stood with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression troubled. Yes, she's gone, he said quietly into the receiver. Christopher Wade took her. We couldn't stop him. No, I don't know what he knows. Yes, I understand the implications. He hung up and stared at the taillights disappearing down the road. Richard Wade had paid handsomely for discretion, but he'd also made arrangements for contingencies. Arrangements that were about to activate now that Victoria had been freed. The truth about the Wade family fortune was far more complicated than Christopher realized, and there were others who had benefited from Victoria's disappearance, people who wouldn't be pleased to learn she was back. The penthouse felt different with Victoria in it. Christopher watched his mother move tentatively through the expansive living room, her fingers trailing over furniture and artwork as if relearning the texture of the world. Margaret had prepared the guest suite, the largest one, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, and had quietly stocked the bathroom with essentials before excusing herself for the night. I'll be back in the morning, Mr. Wade, Margaret had said at the door. Your mother might need some women's clothing, personal items. I'll bring what I can. Margaret, Christopher had stopped her. Thank you for everything. Take tomorrow off, with pay, and the rest of the week if you need it. I'll be here at 8, she'd replied with a small smile. Your mother will need a friendly face. Now it was past midnight, and Christopher sat with Victoria on the sofa, both holding cups of tea neither was drinking. The silence between them was heavy with 15 lost years. Tell me about your life, Victoria said finally. Your father's obituary said you'd taken over Wade Enterprises, that you'd tripled the company's value. Christopher's expression hardened at the mention of his father. I did what he trained me to do, be ruthless, win at any cost. Turns out I had excellent teachers in deception and manipulation. Christopher, I'm sorry. He set down his cup. That's not fair to you. Yes, I built the company into something bigger. I also became someone I'm not sure I like very much. I fire people without blinking. I destroy competitors. I don't have friends. Just business associates. I haven't had a real relationship in 7 years because I can't trust anyone. Victoria's eyes glistened. He did that to both of us. Made us afraid to trust. Afraid to love. Did he ever love you? Really? She considered this. Once, maybe. When we were young. But Richard loved control more than he loved people. Even you. He loved the idea of a son, an heir, someone to carry on the Wade name. But did he love Christopher, the actual person? I don't think he was capable of that. Christopher stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the glittering cityscape. After you died, he changed, became colder, more distant. I thought it was grief. Now I realize it was guilt, or maybe just the stress of maintaining such an elaborate lie. Did he suffer at the end? Victoria's voice was quiet. The heart attack was massive. The doctor said he was dead before he hit the floor. Christopher turned to face her. But yes, I think he suffered. In his way. He drank more those last few years, barely slept. I'd find him in his study at 3 a.m, staring at old photo albums. Photos of you. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself. Part of me wants to hate him completely. But I spent 23 years married to him. We made you together. That has to mean something. It means he was complicated. It doesn't excuse what he did. They fell silent again. Finally, Victoria spoke with obvious effort. Christopher, there's something else. About the financial irregularities I discovered. I need to know. Is the company clean now? Did your father's dealings taint everything? Christopher's jaw tightened. I've spent the last 2 years since his death auditing everything. Some of what I found was disturbing. Creative accounting, offshore holdings, relationships with questionable partners, but nothing prosecutable, nothing that would bring down the company. I've been slowly divesting from the shadier operations, restructuring, making it legitimate. So the evidence he threatened me with might have been real, might have been a bluff. I won't know until I dig deeper, now that I know what to look for. He crossed back to the sofa. But Mom, even if there's evidence implicating you, we can fight it. 15 years of unlawful imprisonment would give any judge pause. You were clearly coerced. Victoria shook her head. I don't care about that anymore. I just need to know. Did my silence protect you? Was it worth it? Christopher took her hands. Nothing was worth losing you, but yes, you protected me. The Wade name still means something. The company employs 12,000 people. Whatever Dad did, whatever darkness he created, I'm trying to turn it into something good. Tell me how. For the next hour, Christopher described his work, the philanthropic initiatives he'd quietly funded, the ethical business practices he'd implemented, the scholarship programs established in his mother's memory. Victoria listened with growing pride, occasionally wiping away tears. You became the person I hoped you'd be, she said finally. Despite everything Richard did, despite the pain, you became good. I became hard. Hard and good aren't mutually exclusive. The world needs people who are both. Christopher smiled. A real smile. Something Margaret would have said she'd never seen. When did you become wise? 15 years in a psychiatric hospital gives you a lot of time to think. Victoria's attempt at humor fell flat. The weight of those lost years settled over them again. Christopher's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then checked the message. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm. What is it? Victoria asked. My head of security. There's been an attempted breach of the building's network. Someone tried to access our residential server remotely. He stood, already dialing. Marcus, what's going on? Victoria watched her son's face as he listened, seeing the color drain away. When? How much did they get? No, don't call the police yet. I need to know what we're dealing with first. He hung up and looked at his mother with an expression that made her blood run cold. Someone hacked our system 20 minutes ago. They accessed the security camera footage from today, including the recordings of our conversation in the car on the way back from Riverbend. How is that possible? The penthouse has a sophisticated security system, but someone with the right access codes, someone who'd been here before, could potentially breach it. Christopher's voice turned grim. Someone who helped design the system, like my father. But he's dead. His people aren't. Christopher began pacing. Dad had a personal attorney, Gerald Thornton. The man knew everything about our family business. Probably knew about you. If Dad left instructions, contingency plans in case you were ever released. The intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Christopher crossed to the panel. Yes? Mr. Wade, there's a Gerald Thornton here to see you. He says it's urgent. The night doorman's voice was apologetic. He has authorization codes from your father's time. Christopher and Victoria locked eyes. Send him up, Christopher said. Christopher, no. Victoria stood anxiously. If he's part of this, if he's trying to, then we face it together. Christopher moved to stand beside his mother. I'm not letting anyone lock you away again. I don't care who they are, or what leverage they think they have. The elevator chimed. Gerald Thornton entered the penthouse like he owned it. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed despite the late hour. He was in his 60s, with the kind of face that revealed nothing. His eyes swept the room, landing on Victoria with no visible surprise. "Mrs. Wade, how lovely to see you alive." "Thornton." Christopher's voice was ice. "You have 60 seconds to explain why you're here before I have security throw you out." The lawyer smiled without warmth. "I'm here because your father paid me a substantial retainer to ensure certain arrangements remained undisturbed. Your mother's liberation has activated protocols he put in place." "What protocols?" Victoria asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Thornton pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase. "Your husband was thorough, Mrs. Wade. Before his death, he compiled evidence of your involvement in his financial schemes. Forged signatures, witness statements, documented conversations. If this evidence reaches the authorities, you'll face charges of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Minimum 15 years in federal prison." "That's fabricated," Christopher snapped. "My mother was institutionalized before most of those documents were even created." "Can you prove that? Really prove it?" Thornton's smile widened. "Richard was very careful. The documentation is impeccable. Dates, times, bank records, all showing Mrs. Wade as an active participant in criminal activity." Victoria sank onto the sofa, her newfound freedom already crumbling. "What do you want?" "It's not what I want. It's what your husband wanted." Thornton opened the envelope, spreading documents across the coffee table. He left very specific instructions. If Mrs. Wade ever left Riverbend, she was to return immediately and voluntarily recommit herself. In exchange, these documents would be destroyed. "No." Christopher moved between Thornton and his mother. "Absolutely not. Then your mother goes to prison. And Christopher," Thornton's voice took on a satisfied edge, "the scandal will destroy Wade Enterprises. Every business partner, every investor, every client will run. The company your father built, that you've grown, will collapse. 12,000 employees will lose their jobs. The Wade name will become synonymous with fraud. You son of a..." "I'm simply executing my client's wishes." Thornton began gathering the documents. "You have 24 hours to decide. Mrs. Wade returns to Riverbend, or I deliver these files to the FBI. Oh, and Christopher? Your father also left instructions that if anything unfortunate were to happen to me, copies of everything go automatically to federal prosecutors. So please, no dramatic solutions." After Thornton left, the silence in the penthouse was suffocating. Victoria sat with her head in her hands, shoulders shaking. Christopher stood at the window, his reflection dark against the city lights. "I'll go back," Victoria whispered. "I won't let you lose everything because of me." "No." Christopher's voice was absolute. "There has to be another way." "There isn't. Your father made sure of that." Christopher turned to face her, and Victoria saw something in her son's expression that reminded her of Richard in his prime. A calculating intelligence combined with absolute determination. "Actually," Christopher said slowly, "there might be. But it's risky, possibly illegal, and definitely something Dad would have done." "What are you thinking?" "That Gerald Thornton made a mistake coming here tonight. He assumed we'd be paralyzed by fear, that we'd fold immediately, but he forgot something important." Christopher's smile was sharp. "I'm Richard Wade's son. I learned from the master, and unlike Dad, I'm not working alone." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Marcus, I need you to pull every piece of security footage from tonight, especially Thornton's visit. Also, get me Rachel Chen from our legal department. I don't care if it's 1 a.m. This is worth triple overtime. Yes, it's that important." Victoria watched her son transform before her eyes. This was Christopher Wade, the businessman, the strategist, the fighter who'd built an empire. For the first time since leaving Riverbend, she felt a flicker of hope. "What are you planning?" she asked. Christopher sat beside her, taking her hand. Dad's biggest mistake was thinking he was the only one who could play dirty. His second biggest mistake was teaching me everything he knew. His expression softened. "But unlike him, I'm not going to sacrifice the people I love to win. We're going to beat Thornton at his own game, and we're going to do it together." "How?" "By finding out what Thornton doesn't want us to know. Because men like him, Men who blackmail grieving families and imprison innocent women, they always have secrets, and I'm very good at finding secrets. The elevator chimed again. A young woman in jeans and a hastily thrown-on blazer emerged, laptop bag over her shoulder. Mr. Wade, you said it was urgent? Rachel, thank you for coming. I need you to dig into every case Gerald Thornton has handled in the past 20 years. Every client, every settlement, every legal filing. I need to know if he's ever crossed ethical lines, made enemies, or left himself vulnerable. The lawyer's eyes gleamed with interest. Are we going to war, Mr. Wade? We're going to survive, Christopher corrected. And we're going to make sure my mother never has to go back to that place. As Rachel set up her laptop on the dining table, Christopher squeezed Victoria's hand. Get some rest, Mom. Tomorrow we fight back. Victoria looked at her son, this man she'd missed becoming, who'd been forged by grief into something formidable, yet somehow remained good at his core. Christopher, even if this doesn't work, even if I end up in prison, I want you to know that tonight, these few hours with you, were worth everything. It's going to work, he said fiercely, because losing you once nearly destroyed me. I'm not losing you again. As Victoria retired to the guest suite, emotionally exhausted, Christopher and Rachel began their work. Outside, the city never slept, and somewhere in it, Gerald Thornton was confident in his victory. But he'd underestimated the bond between a mother and son who'd been given an impossible second chance, and he'd forgotten the most important rule of blackmail. It only works if your own hands are clean. By dawn, they would know if Gerald Thornton had made a fatal mistake, and Christopher Wade would show him exactly what happened when you threatened the people he loved. Dawn broke over Manhattan with spectacular indifference to human drama. Christopher had been awake all night, hunched over documents and laptop screens with Rachel, fueled by coffee and determination. They'd uncovered fragments, questionable real estate deals, suspiciously timed settlements, clients who'd disappeared from public life after Thornton's representation, but nothing concrete enough to use as leverage. There has to be something, Christopher muttered, rubbing his exhausted eyes. Men like Thornton don't operate for 40 years without leaving fingerprints somewhere. Rachel leaned back in her chair, stretching. Mr. Wade, I've found inconsistencies, but nothing prosecutable. He's careful. Your father chose his lawyer well. Christopher's phone buzzed. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. He glanced at the clock. 7:30. She was early. Margaret, you didn't have to... Mr. Wade, I'm downstairs with clothing for your mother. But there's someone here you need to meet, a woman named Patricia's daughter. She says it's about Mrs. Wade. Christopher's breath caught. His Aunt Patricia, his mother's sister, had died 5 years ago, but he'd barely known her. They'd had a falling out with his father years before Victoria's death, and Richard had forbidden contact. Send her up. Minutes later, the elevator opened to reveal Margaret and a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and nervous hands. She looked remarkably like Victoria. The same bone structure, the same thoughtful expression. I'm Hannah Reeves, she said quietly. Patricia was my mother. I think I can help. Victoria emerged from the guest suite, drawn by voices. She froze when she saw Hannah. Oh my God, you look just like Patricia. The two women embraced, both crying. Christopher and Margaret exchanged glances while Rachel watched curiously from the dining table. How did you find us? Christopher asked gently. Hannah wiped her eyes. My mother told me everything before she died. About Aunt Victoria being alive. About Uncle Richard's scheme. About why she couldn't help without destroying you both. She made me promise to watch over Victoria from a distance, to make sure she was cared for at Riverbend. I've been monitoring the situation for 5 years. You knew... Victoria's voice was anguished. All this time, you knew where I was? Mom made me swear not to interfere. She said Richard had too much power, too many connections. That trying to free you would only make things worse. Hannah's voice broke. But she also left me something. Insurance, she called it. Evidence she'd been gathering for years, in case there was ever a chance to bring Richard down. Christopher stepped forward, suddenly alert. What kind of evidence? Hannah pulled a small external hard drive from her purse. Everything. Recordings of conversations between Richard and Gerald Thornton. Bank records my mother obtained through a private investigator. Emails detailing how they fabricated evidence against Victoria. Even a video confession from a nurse at Riverbend who was paid to falsify medical records. Rachel was already reaching for the drive. May I? As Rachel began reviewing the files, Christopher's phone rang. Thornton's number. He answered on speaker. Mr. Wade, I trust you've had time to consider. Actually, Thornton, I've had time to do some research. Christopher's voice was steady, controlled. Tell me, does the name Patricia Reeves mean anything to you? The silence on the other end was telling. I thought it might, Christopher continued. See, my aunt was smarter than you or my father realized. She spent years documenting your crimes, and her daughter just delivered that documentation to me. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to bring every piece of fabricated evidence against my mother to my office at 9 o'clock this morning. You're going to destroy it in front of witnesses, and then you're going to resign from the bar and retire quietly. You're bluffing. But Thornton's voice wavered. Am I? Rachel, read him the file names from Patricia's drive. Rachel cleared her throat. Recording. Thornton and Richard Wade discussing Victoria Wade's institutionalization, dated June 2nd, 2009. Email chain. Instructions for falsifying financial documents. Bank transfers. Payments to Dr. E. Morrison for maintaining false medical records. Video testimony. Nurse Jennifer Walsh describing how she was paid to administer unnecessary sedatives to patient Virginia Watson. She paused. Should I continue? There are 47 more files. The silence stretched. Then, what guarantee do I have that you won't use this against me? You don't, Christopher said flatly. But here's what I will promise. Cooperate fully, and I won't send copies to the FBI, the State Bar Association, and every major news outlet in New York. You get to walk away with your freedom, if not your reputation. Fight me, and you'll spend your retirement in federal prison. This is extortion. No, this is justice. You have until 9. Don't be late. Christopher hung up and looked at his mother. Victoria was staring at Hannah with wonder and gratitude. Your mother saved me, Victoria whispered. Even after she was gone, she saved me. Hannah smiled through tears. She loved you. She never stopped fighting for you, even when she couldn't do it openly. Rachel spoke up from the laptop. Mr. Wade, this evidence is extraordinary. We could actually prosecute Thornton and potentially posthumously charge your father's estate with conspiracy and fraud. No. Victoria's voice was firm. Everyone turned to look at her. No prosecution, no revenge. I just want to be free. I want my life back. I don't want to spend the next 5 years in courtrooms reliving my trauma. Christopher moved to his mother's side. Are you sure? These people deserve to pay. They will pay. Every day, Thornton will wake up knowing he lost, that he was outsmarted. That's enough. Victoria took a deep breath. I want to move forward, not backward. Is that possible? Christopher looked at Rachel, who nodded slowly. If Thornton destroys the fabricated evidence and resigns from the bar, we can let it end there. The threat is neutralized. At precisely 9 o'clock, Gerald Thornton arrived at Wade Enterprises looking 20 years older. Christopher had assembled witnesses, Rachel, the company's general counsel, and a notary public. Thornton placed the manila envelope on the conference table without meeting anyone's eyes. These are all the copies? Christopher asked. Everything. Thornton's voice was defeated. Richard's files, the backup documents, all of it. Rachel examined the contents, then nodded to Christopher. He fed the documents into an industrial shredder, watching years of lies turn to confetti. Your resignation letter from the bar? Thornton slid a signed document across the table. Rachel reviewed it, nodded again. One more thing, Christopher said. I want the names of everyone who knew about my mother's situation, everyone who participated in keeping her locked away. Thornton provided a list, 5 names besides his own and Richard's, doctors, hospital administrators, a judge who'd been paid to seal records. Christopher memorized each one. These people will never work in their fields again, he said quietly. I may not prosecute, but I'll make sure their professional lives are over. Understood? Thornton nodded miserably. Can I go? You can disappear, Christopher corrected. If I ever see you again, if you ever contact anyone in my family, the deal is off, and every piece of evidence goes public. Clear? Crystal. After Thornton left, Christopher felt the weight of months lift from his shoulders. He called his mother, who was at the penthouse with Hannah and Margaret. It's done, Mom. You're free. Really, truly free. Victoria's sob of relief echoed through the phone. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you. The following weeks were a blur of rebuilding. Victoria moved into a beautiful apartment overlooking the Hudson. Not too close to Christopher's penthouse, giving her independence, but close enough for daily visits. Hannah helped her navigate the overwhelming task of rejoining the world after 15 years away. Margaret became more than an employee, she became family. Her daughter Amy, the medical student, met Victoria and immediately connected with her. They spent hours talking about medicine, compassion, and second chances. Christopher found himself changing too. The walls he'd built began to crumble. He started therapy. Real therapy. Not the performative kind executives sometimes used for image. He learned to trust again, to laugh genuinely, to see his employees as people rather than resources. One evening, 3 months after Victoria's liberation, Christopher hosted a small dinner party at his penthouse. Victoria, Hannah, Margaret, Amy, and Rachel gathered around the table, an unlikely family forged by truth and perseverance. I have an announcement, Victoria said, standing with a glass of wine. I've been thinking about what to do with my second chance at life, and I've decided to start a foundation. A real one, not like the corrupt organization Richard created. It'll help families dealing with psychiatric institutions, provide legal support for people who've been wrongfully committed, and fund mental health advocacy. Christopher raised his glass. The Victoria Wade Foundation. It has a nice ring to it. Actually, Victoria smiled. I was thinking of calling it the Patricia Reeves Foundation, after the sister who never gave up on me. Hannah burst into tears, and the table erupted in emotional agreement. Later, as guests mingled, Margaret found Christopher on the balcony, looking out at the city. You did good, Mr. Wade, she said softly. Christopher, he corrected. After everything we've been through, I think you can call me Christopher, Margaret smiled. Your mother is happy, really happy. That's worth more than any business deal you've ever closed. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't gone to Riverbend that day. If you hadn't recognized her, if you hadn't had the courage to tell me. Christopher turned to face her. You saved us both, Margaret. How do I even begin to repay that? You already have. You trusted me. You listened. And you fought for what was right. She paused. Besides, your mother saved my daughter years ago. I was just returning the favor, like I said. Kindness echoing through time, Christopher murmured, creating ripples that eventually returned to shore. Inside, Victoria was laughing at something Amy had said. A real laugh, full and unrestrained. Christopher watched his mother through the glass, seeing glimpses of the woman she'd been before Richard had tried to erase her. She's going to be okay, Margaret said. You both are. I think you're right. Christopher felt something unfamiliar and wonderful spreading through his chest. Hope. For the first time in 15 years, I actually believe that. 6 months later, Christopher stood in a cemetery, not at his mother's fake grave, but at Richard Wade's actual one. Victoria stood beside him, holding his hand. Do you hate him? Christopher asked. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I hate what he did. I hate the years he stole, the pain he caused. But hate is exhausting, Christopher. I spent too long imprisoned by his actions. I won't let him imprison my heart, too. That's more generous than he deserves. Maybe. But it's not for him. It's for me. She squeezed Christopher's hand. He made terrible choices, committed unforgivable acts. But he also gave me you, and despite everything he did to try to corrupt you, to make you cold and ruthless like him, you chose differently. You chose compassion. You chose truth. That's your victory over him. They walked away from the grave together, leaving flowers, not for the man buried there, but for the family that had almost been destroyed by his secrets. The Victoria Wade, formerly Patricia Reeves, Foundation officially launched that fall. Victoria threw herself into the work with passionate energy, channeling 15 years of pain into helping others. She testified before Congress about psychiatric reform, wrote op-eds about patient rights, and personally visited families struggling with similar situations. Christopher restructured Wade Enterprises completely, making it a model of ethical business practices. He established employee profit sharing, created robust whistleblower protections, and donated millions to mental health research. The company thrived, proof that compassion and success weren't mutually exclusive. Hannah became the foundation's director of operations, finally stepping into the role her mother had prepared her for. Amy joined the foundation's medical advisory board after completing her residency. And Margaret? She remained at the penthouse, but her role had evolved. She was family now, the wise presence who'd catalyzed their resurrection. On the 1-year anniversary of Victoria's liberation, they gathered at the penthouse again. Christopher proposed a toast to Margaret, who had the courage to speak truth, to Hannah, who preserved it, to Aunt Patricia, who fought for it even from beyond the grave, and to my mother, who survived it. He looked at Victoria with infinite tenderness. "You're the strongest person I know." Victoria stood, her own glass raised. To second chances, to chosen family, and to the truth that sets us free, no matter how long we wait for it. As they drank, Christopher caught his mother's eye across the room. She smiled at him. Not the fragile, broken smile of those first days, but something radiant and whole. In that moment, he saw both the mother he'd lost and the woman she'd become. Different. Yes. Scarred. Absolutely. But here. Alive. His. The city lights sparkled beyond the windows, each one a tiny beacon in the darkness. Christopher thought about his father's grave, silent and forgotten. Richard had tried to bury the truth along with his wife, tried to build an empire on lies and control. But truth, like love, couldn't be buried forever. It waited patiently in the darkness until someone brave enough came along to dig it up and bring it into the light. Margaret had been that someone, a housekeeper who remembered kindness from 17 years ago. A woman who chose courage over silence. Christopher crossed the room and embraced his mother, holding her tightly. "I love you, Mom. I love you too," Victoria whispered. "And Christopher, thank you for believing. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for giving me my life back." "Always," he promised. "For as long as I live, always." Outside, the city continued its eternal dance, millions of lives intersecting, separating, connecting again in patterns too complex to predict. Somewhere in that vast tapestry, other truths waited to be discovered. Other families waited to be reunited. Other second chances waited to be seized. But tonight, in this penthouse overlooking the world, one family had found their way home. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.